Now, the question that I'm asking today is a really simple one. How good was Pele? Now, it's a simple question that should have a simple answer, right? Like the best of his generation, one of the greatest of all time, the greatest of all time. But listen, football being football, you go on social media, you will hear some crazy opinions about this. They'll talk about his goals total, they'll mock old football, they'll talk about the standard, they'll say that he never played in Europe, they'll talk about friendly games, you will hear all sorts. And I'm talking to you during a World Cup where there's a lot of love for Lionel Messi, and that inevitably leads to Cristiano Ronaldo fans talking Messi down. It morphs into a kind of Messi Maradona debate. And before you know it, Pele's catching stray bullets. So what I want to do with this video is bust a few myths that you may hear about Pele, and maybe get to a better picture about why he was so beloved at the time, and also maybe make you think twice next time you get involved in a conversation about who really was the greatest. First of all, a quick intro. My name's Adam Bate. I'm a football journalist for Sky Sports, and I have been for 15 years now. And I've covered games all around the world, including in Brazil. Now, a lot of the ideas in this video are things I've written about for Sky, firstly when Pele turned 80, and again when he passed away in 2022. If you're interested in more videos like this, please like and subscribe. And once you've heard my opinion, please go into the comments and let me know your take on the debate. Now, the first myth about Pele, something people often mock him for, is that he didn't really score 1,000 goals. And it's true that that tally doesn't quite equate to the numbers that we see for modern footballers. So, for example, FIFA recognised that Pele scored 1,281 goals, and the total that the Guinness Book of Records mention actually includes 526 goals that were scored in friendlies. But there are a lot of points that's really important to make about this. Now, the first point that I want to make is that even if you take out those goals, and I'm going to get to the fact that I'm not sure you should take out all those friendly goals, is that it's still a huge total. We're still talking over 700 goals. Now, as you can see, that's over 600 goals for Santos, which is the most by any player for a single major club in history, but also 77 for Brazil. Now, that's a record that stood for half a century. So whatever else you want to say, the number of goals is not a stick with which to beat Pele with. He scored a serious amount of goals. This brings me to my next point, and you hear this a lot, and this is people saying that actually it was a lot easier to score then. Well, this is interesting because if you look at the Brazilian league between 1961 and 1965, those games averaged 3.07 goals per game, which is actually fairly in line with modern totals. So when people look at Pele's totals on their own in isolation, they say, oh, it must be easier. Well, you could do that with Messi and Ronaldo. You could say, well, Messi scored 91 goals in 2012. Ronaldo's closing in on 1,000 goals. Those guys are outliers, just the same way that Pele was a relative outlier in his day. The next thing you'll hear people say is that, yeah, but he scored his goals in Brazil. And that makes sense to people nowadays because they have this kind of Eurocentric view, which is natural given the geopolitics and globalization. The best players from Brazil play in Europe, and talent is concentrated at those Champions League clubs. But that wasn't true in Pele's day. The 1958 World Cup winning team all played their football in Brazil, and the same was true of the 1962 team. Now, there wasn't actually a formalised Brazilian league as we understand it now back in Pele's day. It was regionalised until the semi-final stage, and then it was a national tournament. But what all this Brazilian talent being in the country means is that he was doing it against the best. He scored 2 goals in the 1962 Brazilian final versus Botafogo. Santos won that 5-0. He was playing against Garrincha and Didi, the best players on the planet. There was a hat-trick in the 1961 final, and if you read the reports of that, it's described as one of the best goals that anyone had ever seen. There was a hat-trick in the 1963 semi-final against Grêmio, in the 1964 final against Flamengo. In total, it was 13 goals and 11 national final appearances, which is a crazy record. Now, we all see the colour images of the 1970 World Cup final, and it feels like that World Cup is where it kind of caps Pele and it solidifies the image of him in the public mind. But in Brazil, the legend had formed long before then, and these 13 goals in 11 major finals, they helped to create that legend. Now, you might still hear people say, yeah, but he didn't do it against European clubs, did he? And by which they mean the accepted elite European clubs of the modern game. But actually, I think his record in those games that he did play is a case for him rather than against him. In the 1962 Intercontinental Cup, which was the winners of the Copa Libertadores against the winners of the European Cup, it was 2 legs. Pele kind of had one of his greatest games of all time. I think he called the second leg his best ever game. He'd already scored 2 in the first game for Santos against Benfica. Then he went to the Estadio de Luz. Eusebio was the hometown hero, the darling of the public, and they won 5-2. Pele scored a hat-trick. Now, the Benfica goalkeeper, Costa Pereira, summed up the mood afterwards when he said he arrived hoping to get the better of a great man, but he left feeling like he had been undone by someone who was from a different planet to the rest of us. The next year it's AC Milan. He scores twice in the San Siro. And in 1969, much later on in the decade, it's the Intercontinental Super Cup where Santos beat Inter. It's kind of a precursor for the Club World Cup. So these are the official games against European opposition, but obviously there's loads and loads of friendlies during this time. Pele played 38 friendlies against Italian opposition alone. He scores 8 times against Inter, he scores 6 against Roma, 3 against Lazio, he scores against Milan and Juventus, he scores against Real Madrid, Barcelona, Frankfurt, Benfica, 6-2 against Frankfurt. And again, it's really important to remember this. This is where the legend is built. People are seeing him in the flesh. There aren't television games like there are today. These games were packed out. Santos were making so much money from these games. It's actually the reason why Pele didn't win more in his career. I think people look at his Wikipedia page now. They go on the honours list and they say, oh, he didn't win the Copa America. He won 2 Copa Libertadores. But of course, these friendlies were the reason for that. He only played in 1 Copa America tournament, the South American Championships in 1959, where he's top scorer, he's player of the tournament, he scores against Argentina in the Monumental in front of 85,000 people. Santos withdrew from the Copa Libertadores because they were going around Europe on these tours. So I digress there, but the point is he went off and he played these friendly games, and they weren't really friendly games. There was 88,000 in Rome, 72,000 in Hamburg, 85,000 in Barcelona. They were a continuation, really, of the floodlit friendlies of the 50s that was kind of the precursor that led to the Champions League as we know it, to the European Cup. So these were the biggest games of the season for these teams, for these fans, for these players, the game of their lives against Pele. And they were brutal as well. People were going for him. I mean, there's pictures of him fighting against Italian opposition. Santos were really working the cash cow. He was playing a game every other day on some of these tours. So it's really important to kind of retrain your brain and think of this as almost a modern day Champions League. And I'm also really conscious that I've just been looking at goals because that's a really simple way to do it. But actually, obviously, Pele was much more than just a goal scorer. He was a dribbler, creator, a playmaker. And again, some of the stats bear this out. The 1970 World Cup, he creates 27 chances from open play, 6 assists in that tournament, which is a record that stands to this day. Now, I also realise I'm chucking a lot of stats at you when actually the evidence for Pele being great, it's anecdotal. It's what people say about him. It's the way that he made people feel in the stadiums. That tells you that this guy was unbelievably special. And one of the final thoughts, I think, is just to kind of remind it to people to try and be humble, because I think it's easy for people of my generation and younger to see television and see, well, we can see everything that Messi's done and we can make a compilation from that. With Pele, there's a tiny snapshot, really. There's snatch footage in black and white. And you think about the 70 World Cup, and that's a great example of that because it's just a handful of games. And we see the Uruguay dummy where he leaves the ball and then just knocks it just around the post, the halfway line shot. Now people say, oh, it didn't go in. But you're talking about maybe a handful of games to try and show his greatness, that we have the colour footage of that, and we see it, and it's amazing. For example, you've probably seen the clips on social media maybe 5 years ago, which showed him doing all the moves, sort of the Cruyff turn before Cruyff, the Trivellas, Rabonas, before people even had a name for them. And again, it's just a tiny snapshot, just a clue that what this guy was doing was special. And again, it's a small sample size compared to the players of today, remember. Now, none of this is going to end the debate. I am completely aware of that. But what I do hope is that maybe when people are using that word fraud, I can just make people think twice. When people are denigrating Pele, to lift up Maradona or Messi or the next guy that people are calling the greatest. Agree, disagree? Let me know in the comments.